to Alex's point on the loading and unloading, because we're not talking about just delivery of materials to your site, we're also talking about whether, how and when and what route materials are taken from your site and delivered to your customers. So what's the route? I think Alex's point on when can the unloading and the loading be done?
To the maximum extent possible, the loading, the trucks need to be loaded generally in the morning, but sometimes in the evening. Would be loaded between those hours of 7 and 6, if those are the hours.
Whatever the hours end up being.
Whatever the hours are.
Yep.
7 being a significant piece of the issue here. But,
right.
But the notion would be that they're loaded either in the evening or in the morning, and they leave for the day. And they come back in the evening, they've spent the lion's share of the day at another location, installing, doing whatever they do. They come back and unload and park and leave. If they come back at 5 of 6, because they get back at 5 of 6, they will then not unload. They'll just leave the trucks as they are so that they're not operating beyond 6. And then they would have to unload and load in the morning before they head out for whatever the job is. So most of the landscaping activity happens elsewhere. There's the morning loading and afternoon loading, unloading, or whatever. And so operate through that as quickly and efficiently as possible. It'll all be done within the area of the land care yard, so that, with the exception of the dumpster location. But that would be just a quick hand unloading into the dumpster, and then park the truck and done. And then all of the loading activity happens within the area of the land care yard, which we think is adequately buffered by the sound attenuation fence and the wood barn itself.
How many vehicles in the average in the morning going out?
We have, how many vehicles registered? We've submitted a list. Yeah.
No, for landscaping. The average number of landscaping trucks going out are either 2 or 3.
2 or 3.
Average, yeah.
And then, Alex, I think you also asked where they're stored, we addressed where they're loaded, where are they stored overnight?
I think the proposal was to, at one point, was to store them on the other side of the barn, so out of the way. Understand that may be an issue. They can be stored. The where they can be stored is wherever it's most appropriate, given all factors. Because it's in the evening, they're overnight, they're not in use, they can be stored. They can be stored within the land care yard itself, in front of the bins. They can store in front of the, I think that's a question of ultimately where we propose the other side of the barn just for.
What else on this section 2? There's a discussion of the plans for how people will be notified, the delivery drivers will be notified as to where to do it. As I said, there's still an outstanding question as to where the bulk materials should be stored, because the abutters have suggested the other site. There's a discussion of the backup alarms. Alex, you had more questions on 2?
I do.
Okay.
I do. It seems to me that what you're saying here is that the primary landscape activity that we would be authorizing is additional noise early in the morning
Potentially.
and late at night. Basically at both ends of the day, and then in the middle of the day, they're all gone, along with all the other people. We have to, as I tried to explain, it seems to me that currently there is a noise problem there, even with the landscaping operating out of Kent. You bring in additional trucks and load them up in the morning and then unload them in the afternoon. You're going to make more noise. And what we're trying to do here is make a combined nursery landscaping operation quieter than the current nursery operation. In other words, we're not saying this is going to be a very quiet landscaping operation, but the net effect is going to be more noise than there currently is now. It seems to me that what we are attempting to do and what we have to do is create an overall reduction of noise. And you know, things like where you park the trucks, I mean, lined up on the far side of the barn. I think that if the sound attenuation fence works, that maybe is not a bad place for them. You know, putting them in front where there is no sound attenuation fence might not be a good plan. But if they're started up and warmed up there, we have to know about that. We have to know, and then we have to know what a typical loading operation is. I mean, how long does it take? Does it take 10 minutes to load a truck? What, they presumably put mulch, shrubs, seed, fertilizer, trees. I don't know exactly what, but if the Bobcat has to scoot around picking up trees at 7 in the morning, that is a problem. The trees probably should be brought to the loading area in the middle of the day because they know what they're going to need for the next day.
So in fact, a plan of operations, which I believe is described in
Operations
the,
plan, yes.
yeah, okay. Is that something, I mean, you've heard Alex's questions, can you address those as far as how the loading would be done? Is it possible to load up, move things to the right position during the day itself? How long does this operation take?
I can speak on that.
Okay.
For the nurturing and maintaining of the live plant material, it has to be in a position to sustain its life. So meaning it has to be in an area mulched in for moisture retention purposes and under irrigation. So it's not healthy for the plant to be sitting on a gravel parking lot for a prolonged period of time. So it's better for the plant to stay mulched in an area prepared until we need it.
How close does that come? I think it's going to be the next question. I mean, can you move it by 5 o'clock and load it in at 6? Is it the night before? Is it immediately before it goes out? Or
It's generally immediately before it goes out, the way it works now.
okay. And that would be taken out by Bobcat and then loaded into the truck?
It depends on the size of the plant.
Okay.
Oftentimes, we try to do things with less Bobcat use as much as possible, but the size of the plant would dictate the loading procedure.
And how long does it take typically to load up the truck?
Typically, if the crew comes in at 7 and we do our daily paperwork and clerical data and watering, they're generally out the door with no longer than an hour and a half at the most.
Starting the loading at 7 when they come in?
7:30 generally.
7:30.
Yes.
So, okay, so they're coming in at 7, out the door at 8:30, but the loading actually in that scenario starts at 7:30. So it takes them an hour to load
Yes, I
the
would
2
feel
to 3
comfortable saying
trucks.
that, yes. And they're all loading simultaneously.
Okay.
And sometimes, and keep in mind, some jobs are ongoing,
Mhm.
and the scope of the work is such where they just go right to the job. So it's kind of predicated by the job and where that particular job is for that day.
Fine.
Two quick questions. One is, I can't tell if the application's been revised or not, but I recall at one point the deliveries was essentially between 9 and 2, but that there was a log for any deliveries that fell outside of those hours. And the way this seems to read now is that their deliveries are between 9 and 2.
we say that deliveries will be limited to 9 and 3. And the change out of the dumpsters are between 10 and 2.
Okay,
Deliveries would be limited between 9 and 3.
okay.
And that a log would be, I think, a log would be maintained if there was a delivery that fell outside of that circumstance. And
The-
explaining
Yeah.
what, why, what it was.
Your deliveries are limited to 9 to 2 by the zoning, so you're going to have to remove that 3.
That's what it says 9 to 2.
And it says 9 to 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
here.
Trash is-
9 to 2, yeah. Sorry?
You were saying trash was until?
I mean, unless it's changed, it says 9 to 2.
Yeah, it says 9 to 2 right here. I don't see.
And that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any longer the language about the off-hour trash by a log, and I'm. Yep.
It's in the zoning that the log is required, so it would have to remain. Yeah,
I understand that the
exactly.
log is fine.
Right.
I'm asking because I recall language that said you were keeping a log for anything that was outside of those hours. Is that, I don't see the language anymore about there being outside of those hours.
Oh, I see. The language here just says a log.
Keeping a log.
I see
Yeah.
that they're keeping
Yeah,
a log,
okay.
yes.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just confirming that you're keeping it.
Keeping a
from
log
there,
of all, I think, thank you. I think that the intent was to say that deliveries are 9 to 2, which is what's permitted under the zone, and we keep a log of all deliveries.
Great. That's what I was trying to clarify. And then
Oh, so the maid had about.
if a truck comes down from Maine, loaded up with firewood, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning, where does the truck go? Is that the truck's problem? Do they go-
Truck's problem.
Okay. But they're not gonna sit on hillside?
No, in
or-
fact, they're told, don't appear before 6, go get a cup of coffee at Newcomb Farms, go get out of here, go somewhere else.
It says in the next paragraph, standard set of delivery directions, see attached. Where do I find those? I'm thinking I might see on those,
That's the back,
the back of this section.
actually, in the back of
It's,
the.
section 22 in my book now.
I'm wondering if it tells them,
It says,
don't show up.
It says 9 to 2 is with delivery hours, dumpster hours are 10 to 2, delivery directions it provides, notes, parking on the street is not allowed, access tells you where, so it just says parking on the street is not allowed.
We should
Doesn't
probably
suggest-
identify the streets that it's not allowed on, so they don't think it's a street in front of the entrance. They don't think it's just for us, but they understand it's also Hillside.
Yeah, and probably just add a line that says, please don't come between these hours, you will not be able to wait on the street. I put the tabs in.
Right, in 7E of the bylaw.
What else, Alex?
With respect to the log, not only does the log have to say this delivery was made out of hours, but it's got to show good cause. Because if the log shows a delivery out of hours and doesn't show good cause, that is grounds for revoking the permit. And people they have to understand that you just don't keep a log and do business as usual. If you're not doing your deliveries as you are supposed to, and you don't have good cause, you've got a problem. The same is true with trucks. You have your standard directions. Say, don't park on Parkwood. And if the trucks say, well, if you're not going to tell us where to park, we're going to park on Parkwood, they have to understand that if the trucks, notwithstanding their directions, park on Parkwood, then that's cause for revoking the permit. These trucks wouldn't be there but for the fact they're making deliveries to this business, and they're responsible.
I have a question. I know this is a brand-new application, but is there any other permits we can look at that show the same language?
It's unlikely because this is a brand-new zoning under which you are the first applicant.
Right, and I understand that, but there are plenty of other businesses in residential areas. And as you mentioned with the signs, the last meeting, you're trying to provide a standard look throughout the town. And I feel like there should be a standard start of operation. And if you do call the police station, the standard start of operation and understanding in town is 7 a.m. And that should be across the board.
This is why we're looking at the other special permits
Yeah.
ourselves to see what the, I can't answer that because I haven't
Right,
seen all the
right.
special permits. But I will say that the standard that you are being held to is the zoning for which you came to the board and to town meeting to have approved.
Right.
So we can look to see what the other standards are, but that is why you're here.
And as you recall, when we had this discussion in front of the planning board with the zoning, we were trying to insist on the 7 a.m. and we were assured by the board that we could come back and discuss it, or else this 8 o'clock would never have been written in that. So it was written with the assurance that we would be able to come back and do the 7 o'clock. And basically, if you look at that meeting tape, it was because we wanted the meeting to be over and we wanted to end the discussion. So that's why we're here with that. But also, I would like to see any other businesses in town who have to keep a log of all their incoming deliveries every single day.
Maggie, you're
And,
not gonna get that.
Yeah, again,
I wouldn't
it's,
ask for
this
it.
is in the zoning.
yeah, but
You know,
it's just.
Maggie, we're paying attention to what's written into the zoning and what you're
I'm
gonna be
very-
allowed to do under the
yes.
zoning, okay?
All right, what else under section 2 here?
So,
Yep.
you said that in the, so I can't find it, the directions to the deliveries will indicate specifically on what you send to people, don't park on Parkwood, don't park on
We
Hillside,
can
don't
require
park
the
on Forest.
streets that are listed,
Yeah,
yes.
like I just
You might
made a
say to them
condition.
that there is no parking within, a 2-mile radius of the site, so don't even attempt. I mean, most
That
of the
would-
truck drivers will get
That
off.
might eliminate the highway rest area,
No,
but
no,
I
no,
understand, I understand what you're saying,
Most of the drivers
yeah,
will get off a highway and they'll park very close to the highway and wait.
yeah.
Yeah, and this is,
Where would a good place to park a truck be?
The highway, I
Probably
think
right
the
on
rest
Route 28
area.
in the Blue Hills there where there's
Right
no
there.
houses or nothing, and just pull
Yeah.
to the side and
That's
stop.
what they do pull up, right when
I
they
was
get
gonna
off 28.
Yeah, or the
Say you can
128
park
rest
so they could
area.
get breakfast
Take them
and
off that
support a
exit,
local
take them off the other
business.
exit, where-
There's not even an exit, you just park right before the Westwood exit, you just pull, all the trucks are all sitting there in the morning.
That's where I tell people to go to pull-off, right before 95.
Yeah, just sit right there and wait. Yeah.
We did prepare something, and I can't put my hands on it at the
Right.
minute. The extent that it doesn't say,
I have it right in front of me.
Okay.
We'll amend it a little bit, but yeah.
But,
It's pretty
but
good.
to that point, Mike, when we get to the point where we've listed the conditions that we would like to impose, and again, the applicant can disagree, but then that goes into our final decision. I think the more specificity we have, such as listing the particular streets, such as listing that the log must show good cause, I think that will be critically important to ensuring the enforceability of this.
I just want to go back to that point one more time, though.
Yes.
Not to
Yeah.
hang on the log point, but we're talking about good cause. So deliveries are going to be allowed for good cause. Okay, so then
They're allowed between 9 and 2, but
why
they
are
have
we, why are we referencing it at all?
because if a delivery is made out of hours, then we should know that. That's the whole point of, first of all, it's in the zoning, they have to, but second of all, the idea was so that if there were complaints that deliveries were being made out of hours, this log would produce it. But to Alex's point is, you just can't say, oh yeah, we're continually having deliveries at 4 o'clock when it's supposed to stop at 2.
That's
There
my
has to have
only
been a
concern,
really
is
good-
everybody, applicant, neighbors, planning board, everybody wants specificity here so that there's
Right.
some clarity as to
Absolutely.
what needs to be enforced. To me, good cause is, that's not specific. That's gonna just
Okay.
be,
So then we need to
you
come
know,
up with a more,
truck was here and we needed to let them in. I mean, I guess is that good cause?
that's a good point. How
I
do
mean,
we
maybe you could
define?
say, maybe you could say the time period, maybe you could say, within a month's time, we should say no more than 2 deliveries outside of the specified time frame. I mean, that's given the accidental,
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the specificity, because that's what we're hearing about. So,
Or we could just
given the
say,
provision for
yeah.
good cause, anything can be a good cause.
Or then
Or
what we
anything
say
could be
is.
a bad cause.
Right.
It can be, depending on who's making the statement.
Then we can say, the log must record when the deliveries were made if the planning board, and we may consider that we want to do a review, a period review after this goes into effect. That's for a later conversation. If the board sees a continual pattern of out-of-time deliveries, then that becomes cause for revocation. I think there are ways that we can word this where that makes sense. But the point is, they have to record them so that we do see what the pattern is, and what we're hoping is that the pattern is between a 9 and 2 and no outliers.
Yeah, I
It
just-
seems
but
like you
my-
might want to build in some warnings before revocation also.
I agree with that.
And I also think it's going to be very hard for a business to monitor whether a truck is parked on Parkwood when they're operating their business. And for that to be a ground for revocation seems difficult for a business to manage.
All right, so what are we gonna-
So I think,
But I think we
if
can
there's a warning,
require-
like if a
yeah.
neighbor said, there's a truck parked over here, Thayer doesn't respond to it, and it's a continual problem, then that's different than, there's a truck parked there, a neighbor calls the building official and says there's a truck parked there, meanwhile Thayer hasn't been notified. So
Right.
I do think there ought to be something built
Call the
in,
police.
Thayer ought to be notified, they ought to have opportunity to remedy it.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back to good cause again.
go, go right back.
Is the good cause language in the zoning? I'm sorry, I don't have it
I
in
don't
front of me.
believe it is.
Okay.
Page,
Tim
If you
reflects where we are.
have a provision that says
What are your pages?
you must record any
So, I don't
off-hour
have page
deliveries,
numbers on this,
for,
but-
that are allowed by good cause. In my opinion, you're allowing them.
Operation starts in the corner of.
Okay,
Operations top corner?
So,
F.
to Mike's point, maybe you need to
4F, I believe.
limit the
Right.
number that can happen off hours. But you hear my point.
I hear your point,
You're making an
yeah.
allowance, and that essentially extends the hours, in my opinion.
so then we could take out the good cause, but say that we're looking for a pattern, and to Mike's point, maybe you establish, okay, if it's less than, if it's at X number of outside time deliveries, you get a warning. If it's at Y, you get a second warning. If it's at Z, if the pattern goes to Z and it's significant, then the permit is revoked.
Right.
So, and
That's
that may be
right.
the way of thinking
I
of
think
it
that's a
because of
good way to think about it.
quantification.
you may
Josh, you had a
consider
question?
just extending the hours to 3 o'clock because there's
Can't.
less likely,
Can't.
well, I'm
We
gonna
can't. It's
ask.
in the zoning.
Zoning doesn't allow it.
That's
Yeah.
the problem.
So, the, good cause to me, would be all of our regular deliveries are 9 to 2. Like our mulch deliveries are, that's fairly local. Our, dumpster is local. Our, a lot of our deliveries are from local, being New England to a little further south. Those we can certainly have more control of. It is the deliveries that come from cross-country that only really happen a handful of times in the spring, that the drivers are not familiar with Boston, they're not familiar with New England. As stated, they make all these multiple stops. And that, to me, is maybe a good cause, that it's coming from West Coast, and it might happen just a handful of times, less than a handful of times. But all of our local deliveries, we can certainly control and restrict. And even tomorrow, I have a perennial order coming up, and they're coming between 10 and 11. That's Connecticut, we can control. It's the further away where the drivers are just not familiar with the areas.
So then as we consider how we want to address that,
Again,
Yeah.
you just said it yourself, you said a handful, you said it's probably less than a handful. We say that, if it fell outside of the delivery time 3 times in a month, I mean, that's,
that's one way of
Warning.
quantifying it. So, yeah, exactly.
which,
That is- So then we need to consider
your
what
intention
number
is to
would be
try to get it done
appropriate.
right, and I understand the guy's coming from Oregon or something, and it's like, he's already starting 4 hours, so 3 hours behind him.
That's fine, maybe there just needs to be a but in no condition, can certain hours be allowed?
Right.
At some point, you can't unload, and I think you probably agree with that. I mean, you're not gonna unload at 2 in the morning regardless, but I think we have to put a perimeter in place, because that's what we're being asked to do, and I think
Right, otherwise
we
it's
have to figure out
unenforceable.
something,
Yeah.
so.
All right.
That's a good idea, and limited number, and
But in no case,
in no case beyond whatever time,
Yeah.
or between the hours of X and X.
All right, so a couple more things under 2 that we should look at. Location, Alex brought it up already. I think we need to talk about it a little bit further. The paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4th. The 4th paragraph talks about where things will be unloaded. So bulk materials into the bin, firewood delivery into the wood barn, and then how it's going to leave, and then the idea of backup alarms. So does anybody have any questions on these 2 paragraphs? Alex, do you have further points on those that you want to bring up? If
Well,
not, I'll
I
recognize
thought
them.
that we, with respect to the fact if you don't want the log to know the good cause, you can just note the reason.
Yeah.
Why it was delivered late, because if it's a stupid reason, it's not going to look good. But I don't think that saying you get 3 freebies, that you know, don't worry about it if you keep it within 3 a month. It seems to me that the goal is 0 a month, but if they occur, then there should be, I hate to say good cause, there should be a reason. And the reason should be, when you look at it, credible. You should say, yeah, this makes sense, rather than, you know, it doesn't make sense. So, that said, I had a comment on your next,
Yeah.
the next one was the loading.
The loading, the delivery of where materials are, where they're offloaded, and then loading, of course, we have another one. So we've got bulk nursery stock is offloaded and prepared for planting in the appropriate field. Bulk materials offloaded into the appropriate bin, which is in that land care yard. Firewood delivery past the wood barn, back into the barn so that wood can be unloaded within. I've actually got a question on that
But of course,
myself.
the firewood, I guess, is a question we have to address, whether or not there will be firewood
Right.
deliveries before we describe. I'm not sure we're not putting the cart before the horse here.
I think, you know, as Tim and I were looking at this matrix and considering about how to go forward with this, there are certainly areas where some of these things are mentioned 2 or 3 times, and one of our goals is to look at how we can narrow this extensive matrix so that we're only talking about firewood once, or we're only talking about deliveries once. On firewood, I just want to put out an idea that relates to the unloading, so is appropriate for this section without prejudicing whether or not we're going to allow it. But the applicant at one point had talked about putting material into the trucks, the gym matting material, the thick material into the trucks, so that as things were loaded into the trucks, it would deaden the noise. And I was wondering if that same material could be put on the floor of the barn, so that if we allow firewood, when it's unloaded onto the floor of the barn, it's not hitting concrete or a hard floor, it's hitting that matting. So just something to consider as you're thinking about these other things. Any other comments on delivery? I think we talked about some of the unloading, but we've got the bulk materials. Yes, Alex, I see your hand waving.
A truck is going to turn into this driveway.
Yes.
It's going to be an 18-wheeler, or something smaller, or it may be a 24-wheeler. It's going to, the big trucks are going to pull in, and if they're full of trees, they're going to stop somewhere. Presumably, they're going to stop in the operations area, and then they're going to be unloaded with a lot of bobcats, which will take I'd like to know. I mean, this is what I assume is going to happen. And then when the truck is empty, it's going to back up and turn around and leave.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think is going to happen, but I haven't actually, in their plan, I don't see that it's specified.
So you would like that specification?
Well, I would like that specification, and I'd like to know about these 3 or 4 trucks that are leaving every day with getting loaded up. I mean, presumably they'll be parked in the operations yard, and then they'll.
So, Alex, are you asking for taking the plan and marking, like, the areas in which this activity could occur? Because it looks to me like from a maneuverability point of view, there's pretty limited areas in which the vehicles can actually fit, the big ones anyway, the 18-wheelers. They can come in straight, and then they can back up and come back out. There's really no other place that they would fit in my look at this
I
plan.
think the
But
way I intended to describe it in the application was that firewood, all loading and all unloading would take place within the land care yard. They would drive past the front, far enough past the front of the wood barn, and then back in, unload, and forward out.
So maybe it's just a diagram, you know, when you do the
Circulation
turn radius
diagram.
kind of with the trucks, you know, you can just put that template in there and show that. I think that would get at that. And then if you identified the staging area for the trucks in the morning, how often do you get a delivery a day of an 18-wheeler? Or how often does an 18-wheeler come with deliveries, if it's a day or a week or what have you? Maggie or Josh?
And Cheryl doesn't yet have the application, I don't think.
I have
So you don't have
pieces
all
of
the-
it,
Yeah, you
yes.
don't have all of the materials, so.
Sorry, so I'm just trying to understand, how often are we talking about a vehicle like
We
this
had
coming
put
in?
together a schedule, and it amounts in average to, what was it, one per,
Yeah, one
Total,
per day.
one per day?
One per day, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that's
Not
fine.
18-wheelers, but just any truck, any
Any
delivery.
truck.
Yes.
The average, it is excluding firewood, there are 40 weeks for the season of the landscaping nursery season.
The landscaping, nursery's long.
Nursery, so the average of deliveries per week is about four deliveries per week of Nutri-Mulch, 2 of Hemlock Mulch, 1 of Playground Chips, 4 of loam, 4 of Nutri-Soil, 4 of Organic Grow Compost,
That's in the
4 of stone.
Sorry, it's in the application.
That's the
Ned, on page
maximum,
9?
right,
Okay,
and that's the
sorry about
maximum
that.
number of deliveries per week. There's a total of, 55 deliveries of Nutri-Mulch. The maximum number of deliveries would be 4 in a week. That's at the start of the season, when they're just sort of loading up, getting started, and then they get replenished as necessary. But there's a total of 55 deliveries over that 40-week period, so.
So that's really moving into section 3, but I
Yes.
would suggest that at least the maximum deliveries per week section of that grid, and perhaps the whole thing be included as part of the
Yeah,
conditions.
I think that would make sense.
One matter that I think that you have to take into account is that if the trees are going to be used in the landscaping business, and if the mulch is going to be used in the landscaping business, currently, the landscaping business isn't doing that.
Right.
You're going to have more trucks, you're going to have more deliveries. You have to, because you're going to be taking in more material, because you're going to be not only servicing the nursery, but you're going to be servicing the landscaping business. So, you know,
These numbers are based on
The combined.
the combined.
Okay.
Thank you.
2012.
2012, right, okay.
but the question is, what is the current?
But I thought the zoning refers back to the 2012.
The zoning requires that it be based on the 2012,
It'll be
yes.
more than 2012. If their business expands, they'll have to find another place to put it.
But, so these are 2012 numbers, Maggie.
So I think that does move us in a little bit into 3. Before we go fully into 3, the backup alarms on the Bobcats and loaders, as I recall from an earlier conversation, it had been proposed that some of those can actually be turned off if there's a clear field of view for the Bobcats, certainly.
Yes.
Has that been done? Will that be done? Are there, and I
They're
think the
off
other thing,
now.
they're off now. And then we were also talking about some OSHA requirements that allowed for those that can't be turned off to be, the decibel level to be lowered. It would be helpful to us to have those
I-
regulations so that we can cite them.
I thought I had provided.
You may have put it in the back, yeah, okay.
The regulation.
You have the tabs.
The regulation allows backup alarms to be off if there's someone directing.
Right,
So for larger trucks, if there's someone on site directing them to back up, they can turn the backup alarms off, and then we propose to do that as much as possible.
okay.
If there's no one backing up, the regulations require, no one to direct, the regulations do require that the backup alarm be on. And to the extent that the truck movements, the internal truck movements would be forward only as much as possible. Obviously, there's room for the dump trucks to pull around and stop in front of the appropriate bay in order to be loaded. So less backing with respect to those trucks, and certainly if there's someone loading them, there'll be someone there to direct them so that they could do it without them.
And so we only have control over our trucks, not incoming delivery trucks.
So those alarms would stay at whatever level those are set
Yeah.
at?
Is it possible for those alarms to be turned off if you have someone there to direct them?
Most,
I don't know.
I think would be reaching for the stars if we.
I'm not suggesting that you can, I'm suggesting that as much as you can.
Because-
Yeah, most
you
trucks
could.
don't have a toggle switch.
Correct.
They come standard. A standard truck is, it is connected because that's, if you ever got pulled over by a DOT, it has to be on. So some companies, like us with our Bobcats, we have taken off and been able to shut off the backup beeper because we control it on our own property, but we don't have control over incoming delivery trucks. They're not our trucks. We don't own them. We can't tell them what to do.
Okay. So
That's
let's,
why we proposed the forward-only traffic pattern.
right,
But then they didn't like, the butter didn't like that, so that's why that was
right.
removed.
okay, so let's move into, because I think we're already starting to get there, the bulk agricultural earth materials under 3. So you're proposing 3-sided contained bins, setback 40 feet from the lot line, bins made of concrete block, and abutting either the wood barn or the interior fence along the property line of 24 Forest Street. We've got the environmental regulations on there. Does anybody have any questions of the storage of these materials?
I do.
Yes.
I think I'd like to just go right to the question about whether or not any of these materials could be stored across the road. I think it's been asked, and I think we'd just love to hear an answer, because I think it just, might as well just get it out there.
Right. There are some potential advantages and disadvantages. We'd like to hear both of those.
There is limited access for vehicular trucks of size getting to the back of that property due to telephone pole locations. So logistically, it's a challenge. It actually wouldn't work.
Is the telephone poles the only impetus to the trucks?
Excuse me?
Is the telephone poles the only restriction on the trucks? Are there other restrictions?
And commitments that we've made to other neighbors.
And the historical wall. We'd have to enlarge the opening of the historical wall.
Okay.
What can you fit through there? I mean, you do use it.
Is mulch stored on mulch and compost on the site now? What's actually on that site right now?
It's our own compost that we make.
Okay,
How is
So-
it brought over there in dumps?
So it's brought over by our trucks,
Smaller dump
which are
trucks.
smaller, six-wheel.
Turning radius.
Yeah.
okay.
So it doesn't have access for 10-wheeler or 18-wheel trucks.
And those are the ones that are delivering the
mulch
materials?
that- Correct, yeah.
Is the telephone pole on the plan for that property?
It's right across it's right across from the mouth of the driveway.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Josh, can you point that out again?
It's at 217 Hillside Street. It's directly across from the right-hand driveway. as you look at the front of the house,
Okay,
heading back towards the wood chip pile. It's directly right across from that opening, underneath the second E on Hillside Street. As you view it from lot 4B, the line between lot 10 and the line between lot 4B would be slightly to the right of that.
oh, okay,
Look at the bottom of the plan.
Yes.
yeah, somewhere in here.
Oh, so it's not marked on the plan. What's the squiggly, that looks like, is that a street light?
That's a fieldstone wall.
And there's a street light in front of it? The little marking?
There's a tiny marking.
There's a tiny marking, that's usually,
Maybe a hydrant is off to
No,
the
the
right.
hydrant-
usually a pole, but that usually indicates a light or a pole.
Yeah.
There may be a combination of telephone pole with street light.
Yeah, that's actually the pole, Josh.
Okay.
Is it?
I know it's in that general area.
It says the
Okay, so
marking
right
there,
here?
yeah.
The trucks were, when we
I don't have to-
tried that at one point in time, the trucks were not making the swing because of whatever was across the street there.
And what's the width of the stone wall at that point?
I
For
don't
getting in
recall.
there? Okay.
Emily, it looks like it's about,
This is to scale.
It's like it's close to 20 feet.
it looks like it's about 20 feet. You've got a secondary wall, it probably brings it down to 16 to 18.
It's not so much the width, it's more the swing. We talked about that, whatever the matrix or whatever you need to do, but
So what's a feet, how wide is it, how long is each feet?
I don't know.
Okay, we can move on. I
Okay,
just wanted to
that's
get that question answered, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else on the storage of the bulk materials?
What have the bins
Alex?
constructed of?
Hang on,
Oh,
Alex is
sorry.
first. You got a
Sorry,
raise.
Alex,
I'd
sorry.
like to know where they're going to be.
All right.
I'd like to know why, getting back to the yard, and Cheryl says there's only one way you can turn a truck around. I see a couple of ways you could turn a truck around. And I see that the shed, which was the home of the artisans this last year, could easily be moved to make that yard significantly more truck-friendly and give trucks much more ability to move, especially getting into the sort of material bin area. So I have that question, why couldn't the shed be moved to make that yard a more functional place? And I assume the trucks will pull up, then back in, and then pull out. So it would be one backing movement, they'd pull up next to the wood barn, and then
Back
they'd
in.
back in and get,
Right.
well, they're actually, they back right into the bin, I think, don't they? I think they do.
Some of the bins are on the, up against the wood barn, not up against the fence.
The shed is a garage, it's not a shed. It's just, we termed it a shed. So it's, Alex, it's almost, the footprint is almost the size of your barn.
It's 16 feet square, right?
And then is that that's a porch that's indicated on it, or?
Correct.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of
Well,
room.
I mean, I still, I mean, it may be obvious to people how the trucks are going to be using this yard, but it's not obvious to me.
So I think what Cheryl had mentioned earlier is essentially a circulation diagram showing what type of truck, wood delivery, mulch delivery, their own trucks. A circulation
with
diagram that
arrows
shows
showing.
exactly
Yeah.
how each type of truck moves through. I think that's reasonable to request to address that. You've heard Alex's question on whether or not the shed can be moved to change that. Obviously, I don't think we can expect a decision on that or an answer on that because you're going to have to look at it. But just note that that's a question that has been asked.
Well, it is a possibility for the future if the operations area is not efficient.
Yep. Well, I think if they're looking at the circulation diagram, they should be also looking at the efficiency of it and what else would make that efficient.
But we do want, getting back to what I said before, we want those trucks to move into the site, into the operations area. We don't want them on the periphery because there are people across the street here and across the street there. We want them up towards the middle of the site.
To your point, because that's where the sound mitigation is
Well,
supposed to
it
buffer
it
that,
simply
yes.
is that on the Hillside Street and Forest Street side, there are no sound mitigation
exactly.
things, so we.
We want the sound to be where it's being
We don't
mitigated,
want the
yeah.
trucks parked on the edge of the site.
Well, just from a point, we are a nursery. We have customers there throughout the whole entire day with children. My children are there. We are extremely concerned about safety, and we don't encourage trucks to park places where they could cause harm to our clients or to our families. So they're not encouraged to park anywhere they like. They have a special spot where they already park, so they're out of the way.
So then you can give us a circulation diagram and show us that, so. And do everybody wait to be recognized before speaking, so. All right, so we've talked about the delivery rates a little bit already, and I think your point to including those in our list of conditions makes a great deal of sense. I think the next paragraph just.
We have the smell.
Well, this is what I was going to bring up, is so we're talking, we've also haven't yet talked about the bins, their construction, their, how they're done, they're the three-sided, and the next paragraph is on dust. I don't think it actually mentions odor, but I think your point, Alex, to odor, I think we should start talking about the construction of the bins, what the implications of that are, how we're going to deal with the dust, the odor, anything else that comes out a result of the type of storage that we're getting. So let's have a look at that. And then let me just see what's next. Beds, we've talked about 5, 6, and 7. We've sort of talked about, I'd like to finish up 7 tonight, through 7 tonight. Then I'd like to stop our discussion, let the applicants sit back and call up the public for their comments on what we've talked about so far, and obviously Mr. Joe Henning's letter. So let's talk about storage, dust, odor. Any questions?
Well,
Okay.
Sorry, to Cheryl, she asked a question a few minutes ago, and it actually was when I realized that I don't see in here, but I think I've seen it, a photo of the material that it's made of, the storage. I just don't remember where I saw it, because I'm not seeing, you actually showed the blocks, right? I know, so, okay.
Concrete block,
Is it in the details? I mean, I remember seeing it somewhere.
Yeah, it's in the,
2x2x4, I think it.
Yeah,
whatever.
Graziano gets them.
So,
Mafia block.
Yeah.
so it's concrete. It's,
Yes.
It's concrete, what are they, 2x2, 2x4s?
They range in size.
All right, so they're
2x2
varied.
by 2x4.
Is it interlock?
There's a keyway on the top, yes.
And so it's concrete, side, back, open front, open top?
Correct.
Okay.
The back is not concrete block. We have the existing wall.
Barn.
On the
the
barn
barn.
side,
Okay.
there is concrete barn until you get up to
6
feet.
feet.
6 feet reveal.
At the
concrete.
point where there is then wood.
Okay.
So that barn, the barn would serve as the back for the 6 bins along the side of the barn. On the opposite side, it would have to have its own back.
And it has the fence. The fence, the
But there
fence.
would be block there.
And how tall are they?
8 feet.
8 feet tall? Okay.
I'm all set.
Okay. Mike, Cheryl?
On dust,
And then with respect, that's right, with respect to
you said
dust.
Mike.
Yeah, hey,
Cheryl.
whoa, hang on. I recognize Cheryl. Cheryl, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, you said Mike first, though.
Yeah, but he didn't have
Oh,
anything,
okay.
so you're next.
All right, on dust, in dry conditions, do you take any special measures? Have those been outlined?
Yes, there's the plan shows 4 sprinklers located on the corners of the material bins. That would be, I think we suggest minimum of 3 times per week for 15 minutes at a time. There are 20 sprinklers spread throughout the property, and that those sprinklers would be on, and then in other locations, we hand water. But a minimum, in dry conditions, a minimum of 3 times per week, 15 minutes a day, as necessary to tamp dust and keep odor.
And then what would be, the items that would be stored in these bins are the items that are in this table. So Nutrimulch, hemlock mulch, playground chips, loam, winter soil, Organic-Grow compost, stone sand, but not the firewood. The firewood is obviously the barn, so, okay. So we just need to know where these are being stored.
So I think we say that the mulches are stored in the bins closest to Josh's residence, on the 3 bins on the westerly side.
Okay,
And then the chips and the loams and the other stone and stuff is stored in the other material bins.
okay. Other questions on dust, odor?
I,
You had mentioned odor, so.
The question of odor is, as you recall, when the neighbors of Thomas, when Thomas had their bins next to the neighbor's line, the neighbors they were really severely impacted by odor. And eventually Thomas moved them into the very center of the site in order to address the odor situation. I don't see what the odor mitigation plan is here.
Okay.
But I do know that these materials can have a very significant odor. And I think the zoning refers to covering them at certain points, and that there may be a fire hazard there. I don't know, but the zoning requires an odor mitigation plan. I don't see that it has been adequately addressed.
I'm just looking ahead to see if I see it elsewhere, but I don't recall seeing it elsewhere in the application, so when you come back to us, actually, page 13,
15.
noise and odor attenuation plan on page 13. So let's just double check. It talks about the fencing, talks about the unloading. Must be the next one. Evergreen plant material. Talks about dust. This is over on to 14, about quarter of the way down. It does not mention odor. So if odor is dealt with the same way as dust, then that needs to be pointed in there.
Well, it needs to be
And if it-
justified that
and
you
if-
can treat
if-
odor the same way as dust.
That's the
because,
next thing I was going to say,
That
yes.
would be the first time that had been suggested to me.
Fair enough. So then we need to know how you're treating the odor, and if sprinkler does it, then we need to know how and why, and if it doesn't, you're going to need to do something else.
Oh, but odor,
yes.
well, I guess I wonder what odor are we having a request to be addressed? Is it from the bins or is it from something else?
It'd be from the materials stored in the bins.
From the mulch, basically.
So,
There is some compost as well.
yeah.
Does that get us to the compost bin on the far side of the wood barn?
Oh, on the other side of the wood. Yes, that would do, because that's the location of bins, so.
Why would that not be across the street with the other compost?
So that's a good question. Ned, on the plan of proposed conditions and drainage plan, you've got a recycle/compost bin on the opposite side of the wood barn from the other bins. So what is that for, and why is it located there as opposed to elsewhere?
That is our, when any plant material may die in the fields, we go and we remove it from the field, we put it in the compost pile. If any plant material, if any perennials died, I put it in the compost pile. So it's not a finished product.
Mhm.
The compost on the other side of the barn is a finished, ready-to-use product.
So the first one, the one on that side of the barn, is something that's part of your ongoing operations. It's not something that you're selling further. So what is that stored in?
That's only really a temporary location. It is in between the barn and the shop. There's it's a kind of two-sided area that's kind of holds all the material in there. And then usually we end up then removing it and taking it down to the street to our real compost area down behind 217.
So it's basically a temporary daily store. How often does it get moved out of there? Is it something, a once-a-week thing? Is it a daily thing? Is it, I don't have a sense of how much is stored there.
Once a week, maybe, once
Okay.
every 2 weeks. That is what we have our composting permit from the Department of Agricultural Resources for.
Okay. And that covers both sites?
Yeah.
Okay. Alex, does that answer your question? Do you
It
have further
answers it,
questions?
except for the fact, once again, compost can be odorous. And I just wonder whether or not that's a good location for a compost pile. Maybe it should be brought further into the center of the site.
Are there other spaces where it would be appropriate to hold that? I'm
There
not actually asking you, Alex. I'm looking up to the
We
applicant.
did move our finished product pile from behind the Joe Henning and Road property when this whole process started. It was approximately 30 feet behind their property line, so we've already centrally located those products
Okay,
as well as the mulches, so even though we didn't have a permit in place, we went ahead and did that anyway to help mitigate the situation.
okay,
So that is already in fact in place and operational.
all right. So but this smaller, your own, is there
That's not
another
an odor,
place
that wouldn't be something that would generate the odor, it's the finished product.
that's
that-
deodorants? Okay.
This is more brush-like than anything.
It's dead.
Yeah.
Good, all right. Let me see where we are. Any other further questions on bulk storage of materials? Location, dust?
How often are they filled? Do we know that?
I didn't hear the question. I'm
How
sorry.
often are
Oh,
they, how often are the bins filled?
And we, you know, getting back to the 2012 levels, admittedly, that is a cap. Presumably, the levels currently are well below that because the landscaping business is not being conducted on the site. If you bring it back up, you're going to create more truck traffic than currently exists. Maybe it's the same as what exists in 2012, but I do point out that there currently is a noise problem, even without the landscaping business, and our mission, our goal, the reason we're here is to make conditions better with a combined operation. Not to just put more noise on top of what's already existing and say, but look, we've taken a few mitigation. It's meant, at the end of the day, it is meant to be a better, quieter, more efficient operation. That's what we're getting to. And so here we have the bins, and once again, they're going to get filled more often than they currently are. We need, do you specify just how often they're going to be filled?
Yes.
On page 9 on the table? And to this point where you've got the total volume in cubic yards, that's for the entire year, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. So the bins that you have are of a size that can accommodate the ebb and flow of those materials. So there's going to be no point during the year at which those bins are overflowing because the delivery has come in, those are adequately sized.
Yes.
Because that'll be something that we look for, is that the bins are not overflowing, that the materials are not stored elsewhere on site because they can all fit in there.
In fact, not all of them, those materials are present on site at the same time. So occasionally you might have two bins filled with one product. So you might have, in May, the early season, Nutrimulch in 2 bins. You might not have the stone chips in until later. They come in and out at different times, but there's no reason or no occasion when bin would be overfull because there's adequate capacity on all of the bins to handle the ebb and flow of material.
All right, so let's move on to 5, which actually I think we've already talked about, which is the matting of putting the rubber matting into the firewood delivery trucks. As Alex pointed out earlier, we also have to note whether or not that's going to be something we allow, and we talk about that a little bit later on. But again, that same matting, my question is out there, is whether if you're putting in the dump trucks, can you also put it on the floor? We talked a little bit about 217 and 237 Hillside Streets. This is number 6, being used for composting. Does anybody else have any questions on this section? We've got the composting certificate in our package somewhere.
And there's a current one.
And that is the current one?
There is a current one.
Okay, great. So when you submit supplemental materials, that would be useful to have. How often does that get renewed? Is that annual?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
But the permit, if there were a permit, would have to address the composting that would occur behind the barn.
Okay,
But as described, because it isn't described in the application. And once again,
I guess I would suggest whether the compost is the correct word for that. So maybe you could think about a different way to describe that. Doesn't sound like it's really compost.
Right, it's part of under the MDAR, we have to fill out they call it their composting certificate, so we have to fill it out every year. So that is what they call it, and that's what we follow.
Maybe in the application itself, you can clarify that it's
Yeah.
dead material.
not in the
that's-
application, and
I'm
it's
sorry.
supplementary materials.
Okay.
Yeah, the application is submitted.
Okay.
Anything else, as I
In the
said, must be in a
supplemental.
supplemental memo.
In our chart, it is, because it is, our product is Organigrow, which is the finished product.
Oh, so that's your own product?
No,
Huh.
that's the finished product that is not our product.
Okay,
In the chart, in
okay.
the bulk agricultural materials chart, it says Organigrow,
Yep,
and that is the finished product that is not ours.
okay.
So I guess my suggestion is, based on Alex's stated concerns, is in the supplemental material, is to explain the type of material this is, even though it sounds like you have to just use the word compost for your permitting, but that it actually is something that is there for a week, it moves over to your other compost, it doesn't generate odor. So, because if that were to be a different kind of compost down the road,
Right.
then it would be a different understanding than what we have today, for what we've been told is stored there.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. As you're looking at supplemental materials, you have a number of things in here that are technical terms, or that are terms that are used for this application, like the land care yard. I think grow out area, if I remember correctly, came up at a previous meeting. The Organigrow compost, explaining that that's a product and not, so defining the terms, so those defined terms can go into the application would be important. So anything else on 217 and 237? If not, then let's look at the last one for tonight, which is the movement and understanding of how the snow and ice management services works on this lot. So it's seasonal business, it's noted, it's prepared, equipped, and stored in the wood barn before and after use. Off-season plows and other equipment stored neatly in the land care yard. Does anybody have any questions on these?
we need to know the 2012 levels
Okay.
so that we can We can,
So that's equipment and,
and presumably, once again, the trucks with their plow blades on are parked in the operations area, ready to go. And that's where they would be operating out of, or maybe they come out of the wood barn. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't say what the plan is.
well, I think that actually covers G. We can go ahead and tick that off tonight, because G is the parking plan, and we've already talked about the fact that we need to know the circulation. We need a circulation diagram, I think a parking diagram to go along with that.
But we have to determine the adequacy of the parking.
Oh, yeah, we're not done with talking about parking. I'm just saying as far as information that we need to request from them, because it's not just the parking of where the spaces are located, which we've certainly seen on the plan, it's what's actually being parked there when. So, and I don't think it mentions in the parking plan where the storage of the off-season plows and other equipment is, so we may want to consider that. Anything else?
Are we doing the parking plan now?
Yeah, why not, since we've talked about parking plan enough, and then I want to move to the
But
public
maybe
hearing.
the folks should be able to comment on this last section first.
Well, if we add in the parking plan,
I mean, the last section does have seven.
what I was going to
The
say,
operations section does have 7 specific subsections.
I do have a question on the snow and ice.
okay, let's do this question on snow and ice, and then I'll finish up. Yep.
The last sentence, off-season plows and other equipment shall be stored neatly in the land care yard. Is that the answer to the question that Ms. Ennis just asked? Is that you're storing the materials in the land care yard
But-
off-season?
Do we have that noted? Does it interfere in any way with the,
Previously, they've said they're going to be stored in the jog that's to the right of the applicant's house at 24 Forest Street. Is that correct? So they'll be stored in that jog area.
that